Okay, I guess this is the sign. So let's get started. I sacrificed my breakfast to the demo god, and I hope that that my demo is working. Because I want to show a demo with Jenkins. I'm also wearing like 2 microphones, so I'm feeling quite heavy and I have a limited possibility of moving. But let's start. Okay, so I'm not too sure whether you see this, but I'm going to run Docker run with the Jenkins CI Blue Ocean image. So it already downloaded it before, the Jenkins image, and I just want to do a few steps to make sure that later on it will be easier to show the actual demo. So you could try this at home. You could just start the Jenkins container. And the important part is this one. So if you start it, it will show you initial password. So I haven't set up anything before. I'm just running this Docker container. It asked me to install the suggested or select plugins. I'm going to install the suggested ones, and I will come back to this. So this will take some time, and so I really like to show how this really could be started. If you have Docker on your computer, you can just start this Docker image, and then you have Jenkins on your computer. Okay, but we'll come back to this. Yeah, so I've listed the steps to do the demo, but I think the slides will be shown later on. So thanks for joining. The room is quite full. So my name is Pickl. I'm from Vienna, Austria. I'm 33 years old. I'm at the moment, or since 9 months, a technical project manager at Electrobit, which is an automotive software supplier. I use Jenkins since 2012. And I really love CI, CD, and DevOps topics. And the reason for that is that I not only have an IT background, but also a business administration, production management background. So, for example, I worked for the Austrian parcel service, and also majored in production management. And I really loved how these 2 worlds, with all the lean management from the Toyota production system, and the IT processes come together and do what we now know as DevOps. I'm here to learn, so if there's anything you know better, please feel free to speak up. If I make an error, please correct it. And if you have any questions, you can see me later at the Ask Me corner. I'm also very glad to be here because I broke my arm 20 days ago, or 30 days ago. No, 20. It was 20 days ago. And I wasn't too sure whether I could make it, but now I'm here, a little bit limited, but thanks for being here. I hope you enjoyed the keynote by Carlos. I have to admit that I do not speak any Russian at all. It's also my first time in Russia, in Moscow. But I hope I get some very good impressions and will have the possibility to come back and see more. So today we're talking about continuous delivery, and it's about automating the implementation of your system's build, deploy, test, and release process. So the real idea behind that, and of course it's a journey to come there, so it's not something that you set up and then it's running. But the real idea is to make releasing a non-event. So it shouldn't be anything you really have to think about because you have done it so often, continuously of course, that it really more or less is a click of a button. So every change should result in a build. So if someone commits to your Git or SVN or whatever you're using, it should result in a build. Every build should be a release candidate. So you should not have release builds. So of course this requires some setup. For example, you have to make sure that all your builds can run in different environments. For example, if you have a staging environment and a testing environment and a production environment. For example, for Java, you have to put your environment settings outside of your war file, or use some similar settings. Okay, and the delivery should be possible for you to do the delivery anytime on any environment. And the deployment pipelines provide three things: visibility, feedback, and control. So the question is, how long does it take you to go from a change in your source code repository to the working software in the production environment? I really enjoyed reading those books, especially the one from Jez Humble and David Farley, the Continuous Delivery book. It's not that new anymore. I think it's from 2010. And in there, they have this picture of a deployment pipeline where the delivery team, so on the left-hand side, we have the delivery team, and they check in a change to the version control system. And this triggers a build, which builds the software and runs the unit tests, and it fails, for example, because something wasn't checked in, or the unit test fails, and you get very fast feedback to the delivery team. So the delivery team fixes the bug, checks in again, the build gets triggered automatically, it gets built again, it succeeds, and then it proceeds to automated acceptance tests. And these may take some time, and again, you will get the feedback. The delivery team should get the feedback very fast. So they do some more changes, committed to version control, the unit tests succeed, the automated acceptance tests succeed. And then you reach a step where there's the difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment. So it doesn't mean that each and every build goes into production if you do continuous delivery, but if you do continuous deployment, that would really mean everything you do ends up in production immediately, so everything walks through the pipeline. In a continuous delivery setup, you usually have some kind of manual approval step at the end, where someone approves that the results are okay. You do some user acceptance testing, for example, manual testing or exploratory testing. And if this succeeds, you click on approve, you approve the change, and then the software artifact gets deployed to your production system. And the idea is that you do this process very often, and it only takes you a few minutes or 10 minutes or whatever to get feedback. So it's really important to have something like this set up. So who of you got a delivery pipeline like this set up in your company or in your project? Hands up. Okay, that's few. One option to do this, and there are several, of course, is Jenkins. They claim that they are the #1 continuous integration and delivery server. So continuous integration is where they came from. It's an open source project. The initial release was 2005. Then it was still called Hudson. It's open source, I already said that. It has a very active and independent community with over 178,000 active installations and a very big number of plugins. So there, I think for each and everything you could do or should not do, there's a plugin. Some people like that, some people hate that. Some people say Jenkins is very convoluted, but I think that also makes it very powerful. So for each and everything, there's a plugin. Since Jenkins 2.0, this was released in April 2016, pipelines are first-class citizens. So before that, you had to create a Jenkins job and link it to another Jenkins job, and link this up to another Jenkins job, and there were plugins to visualize these kind of pipelines. and you could do promotions with the promotion plugins in between them. But it was not easy to set up a delivery pipeline where you saw the current step or the current stage at one glance. So right now, sorry, I have to drink something. So now you can do pipeline as code, which is very similar to infrastructure as code. And they have something like a Jenkins file that you can commit to your source code repository. And so there's no need for you clicking through the forms and settings of Jenkins. There's also a new user experience. It's called Blue Ocean, and they come with a pipeline editor where you can really click together pipelines, and it really helps to set up these pipelines or bootstrap these pipelines. And Blue Ocean 1.9 was released in October 2018. As I said before, Jenkins is not the only solution for that. There's, for example, GitLab runners or GoCD, or you can do something with TeamCity, or I think GitHub also did something similar. And I don't really care about the technology, I only care about what it enables us to do. And the systems are quite similar. So if you start Blue Ocean, let's go back to the... Okay, so I'm going back to my demo. It now asks me to create my admin user. So for those of you who've just joined, I've really, I hope this is still there. No, it's not. I've just started the Docker Blue Ocean's container, Docker Jenkins Blue Ocean container. And I could create an admin user here, but I will just continue as admin, and I could define the Jenkins URL. I think that's important for if you use the API and stuff. But let's say, okay, not now. And what you see here is how Jenkins usually looks like. So that's the old interface. But if you install the Blue Ocean plugin, or start with the container that I just started, the Blue Ocean plugin is already included, and you can switch to the new GUI. And it welcomes you to the new Jenkins experience. And as you see, it's all about pipelines here. So it's time to create your first pipeline. And we will do that in a second. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. So I have a Jenkins file already set up, an example Jenkins file, and I said, okay, I've stored my code in GitHub, and it asks me for an access token with a link to GitHub. It already set up everything I need. Just call it Jenkins. And I will delete it afterwards. So I also don't have anything interesting in this account. So it will connect to my GitHub, ask me for my organization, Rompic, that's my name, and it lists all my repositories. And I have a Jenkins pipeline repository where there is a Jenkins file already in there. And if there wouldn't be a Jenkins file in there, I could create one with the editor, but I will show you that later. Okay, so it's creating the pipeline. And in order to do that, so these are the steps that we have just done. So you have to choose this type of source control, provide an access key, or credentials, choose an organization and choose a repository. And then you have to create a Jenkins file. And it follows this pipeline as code idea. So a Jenkins file is written in a Groovy DSL. So you have to learn another domain-specific language, but it's not that difficult. The Jenkins file usually resides in your top level folder. A different path is possible, so you can define a different path where it gets picked up. And there's also an option to not store it in your SCM, but you could set up a job where you create the Jenkins, the content of the Jenkins file within the Jenkins job itself, which really helps when you get started. But storing it in, for example, Git has additional benefits, for example, for code review and iterations. So all your changes are tracked. It's also important for audit or for pull requests, for example. And you also have a single source of truth, so you can back up your whole process if you back up your STM. There are two different syntaxes. That's a little bit confusing in the beginning. So they started with something that's called scripted pipelines, which is very powerful but not so easy to use. And there's also a new way of doing things with Jenkins files. It's called declarative pipeline. That's easier to understand because it follows the forms you know from Jenkins, so it follows them closer, but it's not that powerful, but it can be mixed. But I will talk about it in a minute. So, for example, the declarative pipeline usually has this syntax or this structure. It starts with pipeline. You can define an agent, so you can do some global settings, and then you have stages. For example, you have a build stage, a test stage, and a deploy stage, and each of these stages can have steps. For example, compiling your code, running the tests, and so far and so forth. And as I said, there are differences. There's differences between the scripted and the declarative pipelines. On the left-hand side, I've added an example of the scripted pipelines. So they do not start with pipeline as the declarative pipelines do. But you have to provision a node, which is one of your Jenkins executors. And then in there you have stages, and then you have your individual steps. And as I said, it's more powerful because you can use more parts of the Groovy language. For example, you can do if-else statements, and you cannot do that in the declarative pipelines without using the scripted pipeline syntax or the scripted step, but I'll come to that. And so it's very powerful. You can do a lot of stuff, but the thing is, you also have to do your error handling yourself. So, for example, you have to catch errors if they occur, so you have to do some kind of try-catch and check for errors. And there's a better way to do that in the declarative pipeline, but we come to that. So to summarize these differences, so the scripted pipeline is an imperative programming model. It's fully featured programming environment. It has a higher flexibility. There are very few limits. So it's more for power users and more complex requirements. And on the other hand, you have the declarative pipeline, which, as the name implies, has a declarative programming model. It's simpler and more opinionated. It also allows for validation and for this visual editor they have. But it also limits what is available to the user. So I think if you start something like that, you should start with the declarative pipeline. And then use, for example, the scripted step. And if this is not enough, then maybe you should use scripted pipelines. Both of them use Groovy. They have the same pipeline subsystems underneath. They mostly have the same steps. So also Jenkins plugins can create steps that you can use in your pipeline, but not all plugins are pipeline ready yet. And you are able to utilize shared libraries. That's also something that we'll talk about briefly. And they can also be mixed using the scripted step. There was also a quite interesting blog post from 2007 on Jenkins.io, which explains how to convert a freestyle job, a Jenkins freestyle job, to a pipeline, and it has examples for declarative and the scripted pipeline. So I've mentioned the scripted step a few times. So the script step, sorry, it's called script step. The script step allows you to take a block of the scripted pipeline and execute that in a declarative pipeline. And it's like a useful escape hatch. So you can use the declarative pipeline and then you find out, okay, I need some, I don't know, I need a for loop or I need an if-else statement. Then you can use the script step, or for example, define some variables. Then you can use the script step, escape out of the limitations of the declarative pipeline, use the features of the scripted pipeline, but you should only do that for non-trivial size blocks of code. And if it gets more complex, you could also use shared libraries, but we will come to that. From now on, I'll talk about declarative pipeline more, because that's the technology, or that's the pipeline that the Jenkins project invests a lot of time in. So I think that's the future, let's say. So it starts with pipeline. Then you can do some global settings that are active for your whole pipeline. For example, you can define on which agent this should run, so on which execute or on which Jenkins node this should get executed. And for example, I put here in my example agent none, because I don't want to block an executor when this pipeline runs. And the reason for that is later in this pipeline, I will use an approver step, and the approval steps wait for your input. So it asks you, do you want to proceed to the next stage? And if you block an agent, then you will run out of executors in your Jenkins server. So I set this to agent none. There's also a different way of doing this. For example, you could use sequential stages. I've linked an example here. Then you can also set up environments, variables, options, tools, and parameters, and also triggers. So for the tools, for example, you can set up. You can say you want to run this with Java 11, and if you have set it up correctly in Jenkins, then Jenkins will install Java 11 on your executor if it's not there. For the agent, you can also use a Docker image, for example, and then you can also set up triggers. For example, here I said it should poll the SCM for every 5 minutes and check if there's something new. Of course, you could also set it up in a way where, for example, GitHub notifies Jenkins that there has been a commit. And then the build starts. But in my opinion, sometimes polling is enough. You can also set up options. For example, I say that I have a timeout with 60 days. So if the pipeline did not finish within 60 days, I say, okay, get rid of it, just stop it. You can also define how many builds Jenkins should keep. There's a new option for preserving stashes that's getting important later, because now you can also restart different stages. And you could, for example, skip the default checkout, which means that if the agent gets allocated, it does not check out your whole SCM. So this was the general part, starting with pipeline and the settings. After that, you have stages. For example, here I created this build and unit test stage. Say I want to run it on any agent. I could also say, okay, I want to run it on the agent with the label Mac, or with the label, or with the Docker image, whatever. And here I can define tools that should be installed for this stage. And then I start with my steps. For example, I say, okay, I want to run and build unit tests. I want to delete everything that is in this workspace. Depends on your setup whether this is necessary or not. Check out all the code from the SCM. As the Jenkins file is already installed, located in our repository, in the same repository as our code. I don't have to specify where it should check it out because it always knows where it is. Then, for example, I could, depending on the technology that you use, I could run Gradle build, for example. I could archive artifacts, so Jenkins comes with a very limited but still artifact storage. But of course, you could also deploy to, for example, Nexus or Artifactory. Then this is something that's important. And now that you run this on pipelines, and I said it could run on different agents, I cannot guarantee that the agent will run, the build will run on the same agent next time, or the next stage will run on the same agent. So the setup, what you have to set up to communicate between different stages is you have to stash files and unstash files. So you stash, for example, your build results, then in the next stage for testing you unstash them, and then you can run your tests. And as I said before, the declarative pipelines come with error handling included, or with not only with error handling, but also with something that you also had in the traditional Jenkins job, like a post section where you say, okay, I want to always, even if it fails, I want to publish my unit tests, for example, or I want to notify someone on Slack or on MetaMost or whatever. There's also parallel execution, so you can have a stage with parallel stages, and you can nest this. For example, if you test something on different browsers, Firefox and Chrome, for example, here. And then you come to this approval step. So the build step ran automatically, the unit tests passed, and now I'm asking my users, or I'm asking the user whether he wants to deploy the artifacts to stage. And I can define that this only happens on master. So for example, if you have different branches, Jenkins with the multi-branch job, and all the jobs in the Blue Ocean pipeline are multi-jobs, I guess. It will automatically check all your feature branches, for example, for Jenkins files, and it will build all the branches where Jenkins file is included. But for example, in my old company, we only wanted to run to deploy from the master branch, so I only offer this whole stage on the master branch. So for example, I could not deploy to stage from a feature branch, only when I'm on master. And then there's also a milestone, and I put a milestone here and a milestone there, which means that if any of these jobs, any of the running jobs pass this milestone, all of the old instances of the pipeline are obsolete. So if you start an instance for every commit, you will have a lot of pipelines, a lot of builds building up in this pipeline and waiting for approval. And you could, of course, stop all of them manually, but it's better to have an automatic approach here. So if you approve one, for example, all of the others get cancelled. And what's very interesting here is, you can also define a timeout, and then I ask the user, do you want to deploy to stage? And you can also define who could do this approval. So for example, you can say, okay, all admins or all testers or a specific product manager or project manager can do this. And for me, when we introduced this in my old company, it was really a very important point to reach because we were a small ops team, and there were a lot of service requests. And once we reached this point where everything was automated, and we only had to define that, okay, project manager X, Y, Z can do this on his own. And if nothing goes wrong, then everything is okay. But if something goes wrong, he has to come back to us, and maybe we have to debug it. But as we run it that often, it usually it was very solid. And when we reached this point, it was really very helpful because a lot of the effort we had in our ops team was just gone because it was like a self-service platform for them. And the other interesting part is that a lot of my colleagues, or my colleagues in this old company, they didn't realize why this was important until they saw what we were doing. So we were in the ops team, we were investing heavily in this continuous delivery thing, and they didn't really understand why they needed it. And then we had this set up, and then a project manager approached me and said, yeah, you know, I have to have this deployed on, I don't know, on Friday. And I was like, yeah, you know, and I was asking, yeah, are you sure that this, that it works? And he, yeah, I'm quite sure. Okay, then you can do it on your own, yeah? Like, if you really want to deploy it on Friday in the evening, and you take the blame if it doesn't work, then go ahead, you can click the button and deploy it. And first he was like, yeah, you know, maybe you could wait till Monday. And then we did this very often, and as I said before, deploying was a non-event then, at least for some of our projects or products, and that was very cool. You can also do post-build notifications. So as I said before, in the declarative world, in the scripted pipeline world, you have to do try-catch, and now you can do something like if a failure or a success, or it turns to unstable or changed or fixed, or there's some different options. For example, you could send an email to the people that have most likely broken the build, for example. Okay, then back to Blue Ocean. Blue Ocean 1.9 was released in October. It now has support for sequential stages, and you can restart stages for declarative pipelines. That's a feature that was wished for quite some time. And yes, I'm going back to my demo. So what we see here, I declared the Git repository, and it scanned the whole repository for branches that have Jenkins files, and it found 2 of them. One is DevOps Pro Moscow, and there it ran the build unit test and automated acceptance test stage, but then it skipped everything because I defined that I only want to have these stages on the master branch. And also the good thing is that it automatically collapses any stages that don't have any errors. So it's a very efficient view. But then for master, it waits for my approval. So it asks me here, do you want to deploy to stage? And as I have the permissions to do that, because I'm an admin, I can click on proceed. And then it will run the steps that I defined, and again ask me to deploy to live, and then I can proceed, and it will do whatever you set it up to do, and yeah, everything is green right now. Yeah, this is what I already showed you. So this is the overview, the approval step. In the details, you only see the things that did not work, or if everything worked, everything is collapsed. It also has this multi-branch support that is very helpful because it automatically picks up the branches that have Jenkins files, but that also means that if you merge one of these feature branches, for example, and then delete it, it also automatically deletes the build. So it really reduces the effort to create Jenkins jobs for these different branches. I also talked about this when on master keyword. And there's also something called the pipeline editor. So if you don't have Blue automation to Jenkins. in order to edit pipeline. Okay, it's pipeline editor. Yeah, if you really wanted to set. Okay, here we go. And here, so Jenkins will automatically offer this to you if you do not have a Jenkins pipeline yet. And here you can create a pipeline and add a step. For example, a share script. And then you can really click together your pipeline, and you can then, you can then click Control S. Yeah, and now I've violated. I have to make sure that all of these have at least one step. But then, okay. Maybe I delete this one. Run anything, and it should work. Duplicate stage name. Okay, all these stages also need names. Let's call this test. And then I get this pipeline script, and I can copy it and change it. And I can also take my pipeline script, copy it in there, and then it will get visualized if all the features are supported by the pipeline editor. They do not yet support parallel stages. So I've also brought some other things with me, but I only have 5 minutes left, so I go through this very quickly. There's a snippet generator, so if you have a pipeline job and go to pipeline syntax, you can create pipeline syntax for all the steps that are available to you. That really helps. Maybe I can show this. If you get started, because it shows all the steps that are available to you. And again, I miss. Sorry. The thing is, I added. Now it works. I added links to my presentation, but when I started it, I linked it to localhost, and now I started with 127.0.0.1, and it makes a difference if you don't set this up. So I see all the steps that are available here, and my pipeline, if you install plugins, they can also define steps, and it really helps. For example, if you run a batch script, then it automatically escapes the backslashes, for example. So that's really helpful. The same, there's something similar for the declarative directive generator for this pipeline and settings. There's also a plugin, but I have to admit that I haven't used it myself, is that auto-converts freestyle jobs to Jenkins pipelines. What's also very useful is the replay feature. So if you have a Jenkins job, you can replay the build. For example, I have here now in the old view of Jenkins, I can now here sorry. If I click on a specific build, I can say I want to replay it. And then I see the whole Jenkins script that it ran with, and it really helps if I want to try something and I don't want to commit it to my to my code repository yet. Because if you're experimenting, you will have a lot of fixing the pipeline, and here you can really experiment with that. But it only works if your pipeline is valid, so you really have an error in there, you cannot use it. There's also an autocomplete plugin for IntelliJ, but it only works for scripted pipelines. There's a command pipeline linter. Oh, time is off. Okay. There's a Jenkins file runner, and there are shared libraries. That's the last thing I want to say, where you should keep your pipelines dry, which means is you can define Groovy functions and use them in your pipelines, but you can also put them like in a shared library and load this library to reuse the same code in different pipeline jobs. And there's also a unit testing framework, and yeah, there are some things to come, and that's it. Thank you very much. We will move to Slido. So the first question is, what is better, a rich shared library, for example, deployer class, or calls to dedicated script tools? Oof. That really depends on your context. I have to admit that I use the plugins as much as possible because, or the steps that are provided by plugins, for example, or the tools that provide these steps as much as possible, because that's something that I don't have to maintain, and where there's most likely a very good documentation for that. And if I write a shared library, then I have to maintain that, and if someone comes to the project, he may not be familiar with that. And but it depends on your use case. I think for some things, if you have a very custom setup, you may need some glue code that you could put in a shared library. So I think it's context dependent. The second question is, what is the preferable way to unit integration test pipelines and shared libraries? Mocked Ansible pipelines that should check some file existence cloned from real SCM. Yeah, there are, sorry, I skipped over that. There's a unit testing framework that is called Jenkins Pipeline Unit. But there's also something new that was just released a few weeks ago. It's called Jenkins Spock, that can also be used for mocking. And then you could also use the Jenkins file runner to test some of your steps. The Jenkins file runner is experimental, but it allows to run a script which downloads the latest Jenkins. It installs the plugins as defined in the plugins text file. It sets up the directory. It runs your Jenkins master headless. It runs a single job based on a local Jenkins file, and then shuts it down. So you could, for example, run a job in Jenkins which downloads Jenkins to run a Jenkins job. So you could like nest this. But I don't have too much experience with testing and mocking pipelines. How stable is Blue Ocean? On the 10th of October, version 1.9 was released. So I assume it's quite stable. There's still a few things where you cannot really use Blue Ocean, but you have to use the old traditional Jenkins GUI. For example, if you want to configure your Jenkins, you are automatically linked to the old GUI. So I think Blue Ocean is quite stable, but not for some features you have to use the traditional interface. Where can I get the presentation? That's a question to the organizers, I guess. I will upload it, and maybe I will share it on Twitter. So my Twitter handle is rompic, ROMPIC. But I also think that you will put them somewhere, right? Do you know? Yes. Yes. Will you upload the Jenkins? Will you upload the presentations?
We'll check it and then.
Okay. Okay, so we've answered all the questions from Slido. Are there questions from the audience? Yes?
How does Jenkins manage dependent pipelines? I have several repositories and separate pipeline for each of them. And then some of my pipelines are dependent from artifacts which are generated from one of my other pipelines. How can I manage this using Jenkins? Or as I heard, I should have a separate Artifactory from.
Yes. So you have the option to run different Jenkins jobs from your pipeline. So for example, there's a build step in the Jenkins definition. So for example, you could start, if there are dependencies between your, if I got the question correctly, if there are dependencies between your pipelines, you for example can run the first pipeline, then execute the other pipeline with the build step, and then, for example, I guess you will have to copy the results, for example, to a Nexus repository or to somewhere else. I think it's not, everything is possible, but I think the cleanest step would be to, if these are the artifacts of one build, deploy it somewhere or upload it to an Artifactory storage, for example, Nexus. I think also Nexus 3.0 can handle a lot of formats. It's not only Maven repositories anymore, but more or less everything like Docker and Python files and whatever.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.